We go through different seasons of life, and in each season of life, there are different challenges and strengths and tactics that we can use to help us stay fit. So today I'm going to walk you through three typical examples. Now, of course, these are going to be very general, but just go with it and see what I mean. So, for example, a lot of men in their 20s, are faced with certain challenges, such as lots of social pressure, having late nights with drinking and weddings, being traveling a lot and working long hours and being the low man on the totem pole. Okay. So that means that they are just kind of stuck at work and, can't get out of it, or that kind of thing. But a young man in his 20s often also can is highly adaptable, right? Because you're young, your body can rebound from more things and recover from more things. And typically, a young man has a higher work capacity, right? So he can put more hours in the gym and in the office, and basically his body can handle it a little bit better than an older man. And before we get into the tactics, let's take a look at some of the typical challenges and strengths of guys who are a little bit older. Okay. In your 30s, some of the challenges might be you and your friends are all starting to have babies or have young toddlers, and that means that you have interrupted sleep and very, very short windows of time that are free when you have children who are 3 and 5 years old, right? You don't get to go to the gym necessarily for an hour. You might get 10 minutes, okay? And you're often surrounded by kids' food, right? If you've had babies and toddlers, then you're going to birthday parties all the time, and they're almost always serving pizza and cake and chicken fingers, and maybe there's a little salad for the parents, but more often than not, people are grabbing the pizza and the bagels, right? Okay. However, when you're in your 30s, there's also a bit more predictability to your routine, particularly at work, than there was in your 20s. And your potential energy is still high. You're not that tired yet. And you most likely have more support resources available. Maybe, you have one of the two parents might be a stay-at-home parent, possibly, or maybe you have more stability at work, whether that be financially or in terms of authority. Either way, you typically have a little bit more stability in your 30s. Okay. And in the 40s, okay, typically what may start to happen for a lot of guys there is that they're at that point, if things have not been going well for their fitness, assuming they know, right, up to this point, maybe you're feeling tired or lazy about yourself. Maybe you have a long track record of poor habits. Maybe you're even feeling super frustrated or have some beginning, self-limiting self-beliefs are starting to kind of settle in and be even stronger than they maybe were before. It's also a bit more difficult to build muscle as we get into our 40s and 50s, and just in general, just to get started. Okay. However, when you're in your 40s, you do have more wisdom and perspective, which counts a lot. And your kids are usually older and a bit more autonomous, so they don't necessarily need you around as many hours. Okay. You still hang out with your kids, but they may not even want you around in your 40 when you're in your 40s. They may want to be with their friends more often. And maybe when you're in your 40s, you have a bit more authority at work. Maybe you're the boss, maybe you're an executive, and you can set your schedule a bit more firmly. Okay. Now, again, this is a very general overview, and of course, any of these things can apply to any of the other ones, right? There are definitely people in their 40s who have babies and people in their 20s who have lots of stability. So, again, this is just an example, right? But going with the example, each situation would call for different tactics, right? And this is very general. I'll wrap up the video talking about specifics, but let's continue with the tactics, the general tactics in these hypothetical examples, okay? So this gentleman who's in his 20s and, maybe he's out all the time and never home a lot, he would need eating out hacks. I have a list of those. Train, train, train. So because he is, highly adaptable and has a high work capacity, even with that erratic and full schedule in your 20s, you can train a lot. You can still train a lot. Okay. You can sacrifice a little bit. I'm a big fan of sleep, but you can sacrifice a little bit of sleep in your 20s more so than you can in your 30s and 40s. Okay. But also that young man might need some tactics about setting boundaries and budgets. And I don't mean financial budgets here, although that's good, but boundaries among the friends and the social pressure and budgets in terms of, okay, well, if I'm going to be in these situations, okay, there are ways to set budgets and deals with yourself when it comes to your diet and your beverage intake to be able to partake to a certain degree, but not too much. Okay? In the 30s, Some tactics that might work for the gentleman with the young babies and the low sleep schedule would be mini workouts, 5, 10 minute workouts. I do these all the time. Okay. Learning how to batch cook. You know, if you're going to be, when you do have very, very short time windows in your 30s, you got to take advantage of that time. So if you're in the kitchen, you better be cooking. You know, if you're in the kitchen for 2 hours, make it count for 4. Pre-party, another tactic, right? So if you're going to be going to birthday parties every weekend for kids, maybe before the party, learn to make sure you're fully satiated so you're not so tempted when the cake and the pizza is presented to you. Okay. And some tactics that might work well for the 40s example. If it's tough to get started, then tiny actions are typically a good place to begin. Okay. Because that's how you start to build consistency. Okay. And it segues into the second tactic there, identity reset. Okay. When you start to build consistency, then you start to believe in yourself more. Okay. And in your 40s, you may need a bit of myth busting and story rewriting, right? Because what's happened over the years is maybe you've tried lots of diets or just been subjected to lots of information, lots of misinformation. Like, for example, people think they need to eat a super restricted diet to lose body fat, but that's not true at all. And something I talk about all the time in other videos. Okay. Now, I'd like to wrap this video up by talking about a bit more specifics. Of course, I'd like to get to know you and your specifics. That's how I can really, really help. But, these are general, overview types examples of seasons that I broke into 10-year chunks. But there are also smaller seasons of life, like maybe you're going through a change of employment, or maybe you have a medical situation in your family, or whatever the case. Maybe that's like a 2 month situation or a 6 month situation. And each of those mini seasons also may call or warrant different tactics. Okay. The point being that no matter what season you're in, whether it's a 5 or 10 year season of a certain theme, or even a 3, 6, 9, or 12 month season of a certain theme, you can absolutely stay fit and make progress on your health no matter what. I believe that. I believe that strongly. And if you're a guy who wants some help with that, just click the link in my bio.